Welcome back to one of the most important segments of the day that we do here. This is a major piece of legislation moving through North Carolina right now that could mean a world of difference for veterans. House Bill 370, also called the No Veteran Left Behind bill, aims to improve encounters between first responders and veterans who are in crisis. Now, this is a personal story for me, but the bill targets 6 counties with largely retired military populations. It would give $500,000 to a nonprofit named the Independence Fund to oversee the program. It's the subject of our look at this morning's veterans issues, and we're joined by the fund's CEO, Sarah Verrato. Sarah, good morning, Sarah. Thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me and your continued advocacy for fellow veterans.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important thing, and you and I were just talking offline a little bit about a personal situation that is very akin to this bill. Tell us a little bit about what this bill is and why it's so important and how it's going to help.
We know there's great respect and brotherhood and bonds between law enforcement and veterans. Both are serving their communities, some overseas and some at home. And being able to bring those groups together and de-escalate situations around a mental health crisis for a veteran, we know is vital. It's something everyone wants to do. Certainly every American can champion and rally behind this population. It's simply giving the tools to help the veterans that are returning to society, making it okay for them to reach out, and also helping law enforcement connect with the appropriate resources so that someone isn't afraid of legal repercussion or criminal repercussion simply for having a mental health emergency that stems from their military service.
Yeah, and one of the things that I can personally relate to is, like, look, I did 9 years in and out of Iraq, a couple deployments over there, and, you know, you think about it, and when you're in the military, you deal with things in a very different way than you do in society today. Look, and let's be frank. Like, when I was in the teams, if I had a disagreement with a guy, we went out back behind the Connex box, we settled it like men, then we grabbed a beer and everything was fine. You can't do that in modern society today. It's just not how it's done. So when guys come back, there's a huge adjustment, massive adjustment. You also just came from a war zone where you're making life or death decisions in half a second, and now you're coming back and trying to integrate into a society where, you know, there's wokeness and culture gaps and you know, all this new soft peddling of you know, anything without getting too much into politics about it. So people are having problems, and that unfortunately leads to, you know, suicide and things like that. But the VA resources that should help this sometimes aren't always available. So veterans face unique challenges. Sometimes cops don't even know, and they just arrest them because there's this guy that they think is going crazy. How do you hear about these cases? How do you bring these in, and how do you start working this? And what was the spawn of this legislation that's going to take place?
Well, like everything at the Independence Fund, it stems from personal experience. A lot of our programs have been shaped around my family's experience. My husband suffered catastrophic and life-changing injuries a decade ago in Afghanistan, and he now requires full-time care at home. Now, a lot of his brothers that he served with, some have catastrophic physical injuries, many have catastrophic invisible injuries. And connecting them with the appropriate resources without making VA scary. And one of the major things we hear from our veterans is they're afraid to seek mental health help. They don't want their firearms taken. They don't want their civil rights infringed upon. And so doing some myth busting around that, both for the veterans and the providers, is really important to us. But this particular piece of legislation, No Veteran Left Behind, really came about because of a personal experience from one of my husband's brothers who was in a mental health emergency. And when we called the sheriff's office to see how he could be located or found, the first sheriff's office that we called really was going to barge into a situation in a way that would have escalated it, and that I fear would have been catastrophic for both parties. He actually turned out to be in another county, and that county had a sheriff deputy who was on duty, who was also a combat veteran, and he got it, and he stayed overtime, and he worked to de-escalate the situation, connect with appropriate resources, and get the veteran into a treatment program that did not punish the veteran for having a reaction that stemmed from his combat experience. And so the North Carolina leaders here, our speaker, our majority leader, our members, they're very committed to making North Carolina the most military-friendly state. And that means having some real conversations around how we treat mental health emergencies.
Yeah. And, you know, what's interesting is, and I've seen this before with a great deal of friends, is they come back, they have PTSD. Sometimes they declare it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get help for it, and most times they actually don't. And You know, and let me, for people who haven't served out there, I know we have a great deal of our audience who have, like, if you tell a veteran you're going to come take his guns because he's somehow deemed mentally unfit, he's not going to give them to you without a fight. And this is why your bill is so critical and why your support network is so critical, because, you know, you have to think about this. There's some judge who may order this who's not the guy stacking on the door, and you may be sending a couple sheriff's deputies that may or may not be well trained enough to deal with potentially a Navy SEAL or Army Special Forces on the other end of that door who's like, yeah, I was willing to die for someone else's rights, I'm going to keep my own. And that's an important thing. And you know, you get these talking points from politicians on both sides of the aisle that just don't get it. Like the other sheriff you talked to who wasn't a combat veteran, they're like, well, this is the law and we're going to enforce it. There has to be some sort of understanding. It's like, okay, do you want to cost lives on both sides? And unfortunately on both sides, or do you want to fix the problem, right?
Right, absolutely. And it's okay. We love the Second Amendment, and we also really want to prevent veteran suicide. And those two things can work hand in hand. We don't need to just take veterans' rights away in order to get them into a treatment program. And I think myth busting that, destigmatizing, wanting to reach out for mental health is something that we can all be part of. And we're certainly seeing it in the law enforcement community because, again, there's a great bond between those who serve overseas and those who serve at home.
Right. So how do people get involved? How do they help? How can they help push this legislation in not just North Carolina, but maybe other states too?
Absolutely. And that's really how it starts. It starts in the local communities. We know that the veterans are returning. We've been in Iraq and Afghanistan and these back-to-back combat deployments. And so integrating veterans into their community and integrating the communities into different services at the local, state, and federal level for veterans is vital. So our website is independencefund.org. And what I would really encourage is if a veteran is in crisis, the first step is to please call the Veterans Crisis Line, which is 800-273-8255. But to be a larger part of change in the community, reach out to us. We're really interested in talking to states that want to walk the walk for our veterans. And that means doing so and talking about things that are more than waving a flag at homecoming, that are talking about the real mental health challenges about integrating from a combat zone back into the community.
Yeah, no, Sarah, it's a very important thing. We appreciate you joining us very much. Do not stop on this mission. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.